Our next presenter helps us to tell the story that even wonderful films from the past can benefit from the digital present and future. It used to be that after a film had its moment in the sun, for the most part these reels would sit somewhere and maybe it was too hot and maybe it was a little damp and all kinds of horrible things would happen to this actual film stock. And so some of our favorite old films are not in a there are no pristine copies left. And not only that, a lot of these films sort of would lose favor and you wouldn't get to see them again ever. And so we think that it's very, very much in keeping with the AFI's commitment to preservation of film and to ensuring that the full spectrum of film history be available to fans and to creators. So with that, I would very much like to bring Tom Burton up to the stage, and I think you'll be kind of wowed by what they've done this year.
So this project that I want to tell you about is about the digital restoration of a film called Les Vacances de Monsieur Hulot. En anglais, that's Mr. Hulot's Holiday, directed by Jacques Tatis. And the story of this film we'll go into a little bit, but like so many of these films of this era, this is a 1950s, early 1950s film. The preservation of these films has been a bit of a challenge because it's very difficult, frankly, to justify the kinds of resources that it takes to keep these films fresh and keep exposing them to new audiences. So that's kind of the world that we get the privilege to live in. This project was a collaboration put together with a lot of very important people in this world. The Thomson Foundation for Film and Television Heritage, based in Paris, is dedicated to this very thing around the world, going into archives, identifying at-risk libraries, and trying to muster resources from the business community and the archive community to see that they get repaired. So without their help, projects like this don't happen. We also worked with my pure love in life, La Cinémathèque Française. These people, and I think I did a plug last year for this, if you're visiting Paris, screw the Eiffel Tower, go to the Cinémathèque, and I mean that in all seriousness. This is an incredible group of people and a collection of archives and costumes and equipment and turn-of-the-century glass lantern projection. I mean, this is the trip to Paris. In fact, let's all go now because it's an incredible place. The rights holder of this film is Les Films de Mon Oncle and Jérôme Deschamps, who actually happens to be the nephew of Jacques Tatis, who directed the film. And another group called La Fondation Groupe Pamagan pour le Cinéma also provided funds and support for this. Elie d'Appasson, which means tuning fork in French, by the way, did the sound restoration and, of course, our little self-acknowledgement there. So a little history of this film. That's Jacques himself at the camera. Jacques Tatis directed, by the way, and is Monsieur Hulot, as those aficionados among you there who know the history. He began shooting this film in 1951, but what presented part of our challenge is that this film was recut and re-released 3 times. And in the 50s, that didn't mean making a data backup and re-editing the data, did it? So this original piece of material got abused pretty severely along the way as scenes were cut, added, new materials added back in. So this first release was in 1953, but it was then re-released and re-edited in the 60s. And then, separate story, after seeing a Spielberg film called Jaws, he was inspired to go back and add some other scenes. It's never done. My painting teacher told me one time that it takes 2 people to do a painting. It's one to put the paint on the canvas and somebody else to hit you over the damn head when it's finished. Jacques didn't take that class, apparently. The original camera negative was nitrate, and this was right at the cusp, talking to Suzanne's changing landscape. This is a changing landscape that was going on at the time here, and nitrate, which we'll talk about very briefly later, has its own challenges. It's nitrocellulose. I don't know why I subtitled that, but anyway, the cut negative that does survive is a combination of this nitrate original negative and then a lot of acetate pieces that were cut back in because of opticals and new new footage that was added, and it was shot in a full frame perf to perf 1:37 to 1 ratio. So talking about that, this also becomes part of the challenge when we're doing films. Ooh, they got loud, didn't it? When we're doing films for new aspect ratios, because these films, as you can see, are very rectangular and they don't really fit that beautiful 16:9 flat panel that you just bought. So part of the challenge we always have is when we're debating between being authentic to the original material and somehow fitting new media formats, we really, in these archive senses, always tend to go toward what was authentic. So when we're creating these new aspect ratios for new release, the debate comes up. Do we do this one, which we would call 1:37 pillar boxed, meaning the black on both sides of the image, that would fit nicely in a 1:8:5 aspect ratio so that any theater essentially around the world could project it? Most theaters these days are not set up to accommodate these old 1:37 ratios. So there was this choice, so it could be more widely distributed, or we could release it in this way, where you can see the soundtrack would be running, and here is the full 1:37 aspect ratio, and that's in what would be called Full Frame Academy, and this is the most authentic but the most limited kind of release. Art houses, selected theaters can project this. This is the way that was chosen to go because this is the authentic viewing experience that was had in 1953. Here's the background on this. So the challenges that we had were that this, the surviving negative, not only was it nitrate and acetate, but it didn't actually represent the final cut that he had done. Those elements had been lost. The negative was extremely badly damaged, and individual frames and indeed entire sequences were missing that we had to go find. So the goal was to restore this final cut, which didn't exist, and make new printable negatives and archival, put them away and keep them negatives. So very quickly, for those of you that know about nitrate, pardon this little side trip, but it's important to know that this nitrocellulose, this nitrate, why it was a bit of a challenge and remains to be today. This is the substrate that the emulsion is actually put on. Today it's acetate. This was first introduced, believe it or not, in 1899 by Kodak. And the great news is that the images are just spectacular out of this stuff. You've seen old movies from the 20s, the 30s, and those rich black and white grayscales are incredible. The bad news is that it'll blow up. It's real good. It's extremely flammable, and the truth is it creates its own oxygen when it's burning, so even if you put it underwater, it's going to continue. So there were incidents with projection booth fires that went horribly bad. The other thing is it decomposes and releases a flammable gas that, in addition to being a risk to itself, will also destroy the other acetate films in the room with it. So we needed to get some new stuff going. So what first happened is the Cinémathèque Française did an exhaustive research of all possible elements that existed for this film, prints, negatives, interpositives, and gave us a literally shot-by-shot description with the condition of all those elements. Once an assessment was made of what our hero elements were going to be, they finally, here's what they ran into. Sorry, this is the kind of condition that this film was in. Not highly projectable today. Actually had holes and punctures and all kinds of nasty stuff going on in the elements. The edits that had gone on, these heavy glue splices, had caused not only contamination into the image, but they caused a lot of bumps as the film went through the gate and ended up doing things like tearing the film in half. So the negative was not exactly pristine. So once these chosen elements were provided that we could begin working with, our lab here went through and we do then a frame-by-frame research again of the chosen elements to identify at every frame of the film what the challenge of that frame is. And this roadmap becomes the guide that we begin to use. So the first thing that we did was go into, because this was a horribly challenged negative, the first thing we did is go in and make a new printing interpositive because this is a way to do two things: to capture the state of this film element as a moment in time. So before we do any work, we capture it, and we have now an interpositive in fine-grained black and white of the condition of the film. The problem is that these thick glue splices, as we were making this interpositive, were causing warps and bumps at every splice. So what we needed to do, starting very early on, was custom solutions. So this Bell & Howell panel printer that we do these contact wet gate prints on, meaning the original source and the raw negative are put together through a liquid bath, which helps, which is an optically pure liquid, which helps cover some scratches and makes for a much more accurate transmission. We had to adjust the gate of this for almost every cut of the film to avoid these issues that were coming up from the physical nature of the film. Once all that background was taken care of and we had the new interpositive, we were able to then begin the digital part of the process. And we then went to several different kinds of scanning devices depending on the condition of the elements, and the data was then brought into a timeline in an editor. And at this point, we enter a world that's much like doing a contemporary digital intermediate for a modern release film. We now have data. We now have a template of what we know the film is supposed to look like. And in an editorial bay, in this case in a platform called Fire, we literally constructed a digital replica of this entire film in sequence in the proper order from the various scans. At that point, and sort of concurrently with this, we begin the actual image restoration. And that process is a lengthy and time-consuming process, as you can tell from the looks of the original source. And this happens on a variety of both industry standard platforms. We probably use 6 or 7 different kinds of digital tools that are specifically designed for restoration. We design a lot of them ourselves, which are custom tools, and then a lot of them are actually visual effects type solutions. Here's an example of the solutions that we came up with. This is the how it looked at the beginning. That's what we now have in the new restored version. We have scenes that look like this in the current print, with literally pieces of the film been ripped apart and put back together. We now have this. This was the only color, the only color shot in the film, which is another whole story in and of itself. But this, you can see the big chunks of dirt and the heavy bad grain. This shot now back to the way the nitrate should have looked in the first place. Here's a good example of some of the physical issues. On the left, what we had to work with in terms of image stability in the gate and the general condition of the film, and what was the result of the restoration. There's some cases where it's so bad, and I'll show you this, that section, there are missing frames out of this section, and there's actually a warp in the image, and it doesn't matter. There are tons of these kinds of shots throughout the film from the re-editing. We actually would go in this case, into visual effects. You can see the frame is actually blurred. The image of that particular frame is blurred, and there are missing frames. We would go in and, okay, we got to take the people out of the shot. And we would literally reconstruct the image by creating a new background without the actors, start building them back into the scene, in this case, to replace where they should be in the shot, until the shot was completely reconstructed. So a little quick side-by-side of how that ends up at the end of the day. This is one of those examples of the debate on what do you fix and what don't you fix. There are things that you have a lot of power to do, and should you use it or not. This is a case, and I'm going to show you this. I want you to look right here in this area, because this is part of an optical that went very bad at the time it was done. You'll see extremely bad registration in a second here, where the two background plates kind of don't work too well together. This is the debate now, because do we fix this? And the rights holder said, yes, please do. Jacques would have wanted that to happen. So we go in this case, and essentially rebuild that optical composite that was done 58 years ago, whatever it was, 55 years ago, and now have a much more beautiful scenario. So then after all this, we go in what would have been color grading in a new DI. This is a gamma correction now as we do black and white grading on a DaVinci platform. And we output not only film color space version, but we put it out for D-Cinema as well. And we put it out for Rec 709 Criterion. We'll be releasing a DVD of this next year. And then the new archival negatives were created, output from the data on Arri laser recorders. And the new composite answer print was printed at our lab on the Schmitza printer, for those of you who are taking notes. And this is where the optical composite prints are actually made that are now going to release at the New Art, by the way, on November 27th. This film will run in its newly restored state for 1 week only. And what we have then at the end of the day are these incredible images of Mr. Hulot. And if you know anything about this character, Mr. Bean is a direct ripoff of this, by the way, as is Jerry Lewis's characters for the most part. And he was foundational in establishing this bumbling comedian character. And now we have him back. C'est tout, merci. That's... I believe you are hallucinating. Yes.
Can you repeat the question?
I want whatever she has. No, it's always, the question was, is there still some remaining damage once you do one of these earth-shattering restorations? And the answer is yes. There's always a challenge when you get into these, because they do cost an exceptional amount of money. Exceptionable, I believe is what I said. Amount of money, and you get to a point. We also had a deadline on this I think we did this entire project in about 2.5 months. And so there are always budget and schedule and other kind of parameters that play a factor in this. So it's not a purist endeavor by any means, but you do your best to get them out. And then there are some things that you just don't have the time or the money or the ability to deal with. It is very much a manual process in the search and destroy part of it, but there are a great number of automated tools and processes that can do a certain amount of work at the beginning to identify dirt and scratches. There's some very sophisticated devices that will scan a scene and look for things that it decides are anomalies. Pieces of dirt flying around can also, unfortunately, be stars twinkling in the sky, which you don't want to remove, or sparkles on the ocean, which you don't want to remove. So there's always this balance between letting the automated pass go and then rating it back and going, no, that wasn't what we wanted to fix. We also continue to develop a lot of our own custom tool sets that sort of fill in the gaps between what's available in this very sophisticated market and what we need for solutions. And we actually have a research division in our company that helps us identify these kinds of things and find new tools.